Hey everybody, Slimebeast here again. I've got a podcast coming out with Dead Palette and Abysme called the Fear Fiction Podcast. It's going to be at youtube.com/fearfic. Should be on your screen. Should be in the description below. Go there, look at it, listen to it, love it, lick it, lump it, like it, I don't know, whatever. But yeah, it's going to be a podcast reading short horror fiction posted on the web. You might be saying to yourself, isn't that just creepypasta? No, it will include creepypasta, troll pasta, icon pasta, spin pasta, ashcan horror, keyhole fiction, maybe science fiction if it has a scary, bend to it. Different things like that. Just basically any horror on the internet, written horror is fear fiction. So yeah. Go listen to the podcast. But here is a special preview, a small episode 0 of the podcast, and I won't even talk to you anymore. I won't bother you anymore. Just here it is right now.
Welcome to the Fear Fiction Podcast. Fearfic is the term for short horror fiction, mostly posted on the web. It includes any and all related subgenres. Join three assholes talking basement goo Slimebeast, inebriated interstellar traveler Abysme, and irritable ghostly man-whore Dead Palette, as they read all stories horror and internet-related, paragraph by paragraph, and bullshit while they do it. From adolescent revenge fantasies to subtle postmodern narratives about real-life events and everything in between, they read it and critique. You better believe it. Kick it to the cold open, white boy.
So, yeah.
Yep.
Slimebeast, you go first.
Fuck you. No. Alright, I'll go first. I'm Slimebeast. Y'all know me. There. That's what I'll do. But, I guess we should express that this is the first seminal, is that the right term, episode of the Fear Fiction Podcast. This is episode 0. And we are your patient zeros.
Definitely seminal.
What about being seminal? What?
If I'm on the show, it's definitely seminal.
I see. But yeah, so this is our flagship episode, our preview, our starting shot. I don't know what the hell to call it. But yeah, this is episode 0, and we are the Fear Fiction Podcast.
Tell us about the one story you wrote.
So some of you may have heard that Slimebeast is responsible for at least one real popular story. Slimebeast put no effort and time into it, and this is a fact. Look it up. And yeah, I guess if you really want me to go first, I'll just say that I guess late 2012 I started writing creepypasta, quote unquote. Before that, I did write short stories. I did write horror. I wrote comic books, different things like that. But there was a contest on a site I visited at the time, bogleech.com, and it was a contest to write creepypastas. So I just figured I always like to, challenge myself to see what I can make based on, something like an outside influence, to see if I can make something that matches up to it and blends in, with that format or whatever. And yeah, so I entered the contest, I guess won, not for Abandoned by Disney, one for a different story called Click Reload. And yeah, from that point forward, I just wrote creepypastas, I guess, in my spare time whenever I felt like it. And I've written probably, I think, around 200 or more at this point. But yeah, but one of them is Abandoned by Disney, and that's the one that people know. So yeah, I'm not really sure what to cover, but I guess I could say that my history of writing has been sort of trying to see what I can do to sort of make my work fit in with other things. I've written certain things that might be considered
Sonic fan fiction.
Yeah, Sonic fan fiction. You might consider it Sonic fan fiction. I consider it canon. But yeah, some things that might be considered a little out there, like there was a quote site called bash.org, which some people may be familiar with. You can actually find quotes from Lemon Lime Skull on there, which is from the story Funny Mouth. I just sort of wanted to see if I could get them to approve quotes. So I would manufacture quotes trying to fit the type of thing they approve and see if I could get them to put something up. It's just that challenge of, can I write something, that fits these factors, that will be approved by these people based on what I've seen in terms of evidence of what they like, I wrote a fake script leak for Dawson's Creek back when I was an extra on the show. People would always ask me for clues about what was going to happen on the show and stuff like that. So I wrote a fake script leak about one of the characters being inappropriately approached by a teacher. And that got picked up by news sites, for the show and everything. And they were saying, in an upcoming episode, the character of Jen is inappropriately propositioned by a teacher. So I guess people bought it. It was all written in the format of the show and all that, of the scripts. But I guess summary is I'm a bastard, and I like making shit up.
A shit stirrer.
I'm a shit stirrer. That's true. I'm the Sundari Wendy of online horror fiction.
Yeah, Sundari.
But yeah, so that's when I was in kindergarten, I had a particularly famous story where I wrote a story about woodland creatures who were getting together for a birthday party. But little did the birthday guest know that the others were plotting to kill her. And so that made the nursery school teacher contact my mom and say, he wrote this interesting story. And my mom was like, well, that's what he wanted to write. He just wrote a story, it's no big deal. And so that was kind of like my first, I guess, foray into dark writing
and shit stirring.
Yeah,
both
in kindergarten.
At the same time.
Yeah, or nursery school, I don't know. But
he
yeah,
went home and made a video about the teacher that reported him, and it just blew up after that.
Yeah. So, my nursery school teacher, here's a screenshot of her on Twitter. And it's just like a child's drawing in crayon, like with a little blue bird.
Teacher with under it.
Yeah, the name is @teacher, and the post is "Be a big stupid head,"
And it's spelled TECHUR.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, I ended it by writing Kofifi. I don't know what that means, but yeah. So
Kofifi.
Yeah. I never really have too much to say about myself. I can just say random things. Like, in the 1990s, I worked on one of the first online multiplayer graphical games to ever exist. And I could just say random shit like that, but I don't really know what...
And he did it to pay for his abortion.
Yeah, I did it to pay... What?
Wow.
Not from a woman. He was just really constipated, so he needed the equipment.
To pay for an abortion, not from a woman, from a male doctor. Oh, okay.
Oh,
sure. But yeah, I don't really know what to say about myself usually, because I could just say a bunch of random, unconnected bullshit. I just like doing all different things, and so it doesn't really mesh well together in terms of telling one single audience something they'll be interested in.
I know that feeling.
And I also
do you want to go next, or should I go next?
I also was a voice actor in You're Under Arrest.
Yes. And I will always bring that up, because I love You're Under Arrest.
I guess that's me. That's me, just Slimebeast. So.
Yeah, I can go next.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
My name is Abysme. God damn it.
I like making music. Blah. I want to contribute to the world.
And we're done. All right. Dead palette. My name is Abysme, and I do make music. When I am not making music, which is usually of the horror and science fiction variety, I like writing and reading science fiction and horror. So I initially really got into just the content creation portion of it, and I think around 2014, 2015, grew rather dissatisfied with what most YouTube creators were doing with online horror fiction, so I sought out other channels that were just really trying to enhance the genre and pointing out what was wrong with the detractors. Host a couple podcasts that also deal with this. There's Raw Dog Readings, there's Ray Gun Readers, And just obviously there's this, there's hyperrealists. That's kind of what I'm doing right now. I could mention a bunch of random facts about myself, like Slimebeast, but they may not be relevant.
Mention the most random fact about yourself and then don't explain it.
You like scotch?
That's not random. That's not random. That's well known.
He likes the Scotch.
The Scotch.
The Scottish people.
I'm primarily Danish and Scottish, so probably gonna die of alcohol poisoning.
Have you
ever?
I'm
going out.
Have you ever drank Scotch with a Danish?
No. I want to try that one day when I go to Denmark. I haven't drank Scotch and had a Danish.
That's what I don't mean with a Danish person. Jesus Christ. Have you ever had a Guinness with a Flemish person? I don't know. But anyway.
Are we on to me then?
I guess we're kind of blowing through these things. We're actually not as interesting as we thought.
Well, I could just keep going on, but I mean, it's not hard to look us up and what we do, so it just feels kind of ego-stroking at this point.
No, I mean, that's why we're doing this. Anyway, I'm I'm Dead Palette. I'm an artist, and just about every sense of the word. I went to the Columbus College of Art and Design and graduated in 2013, where my thesis show was centered around creepypasta, and I wrote 21 short, like 2 to 5 paragraph creepypastas. And I thought that was like a really cool cutting edge horror thing, even though it was kind of like confused and mixed up, and creepypasta doesn't mean a whole lot nowadays. I thought that the idea of like horror being explored in the fine art world was underexplored, so I wanted to do that. And ever since then, I've been interested in critiquing and analyzing online horror in just about every format. I love sexual-based humor. I love sex. I like sex.
Sex with who? My wife.
My wife. I don't have a wife. I have a girlfriend of 9.5 years. No humble brag right there.
I thought you were going to say no relation. I was like, I hope not.
Well, we look similar. But outside of that, she's an artist too. I like playing Overwatch, and I used to like making mixed drinks, but now I've moved on to a new phase in my life where I just sit down and drink a whole bottle of white wine by myself. Not alone. I drink the bottle of white wine by myself, but in the company of other people.
I see. A likely story. So you moved on from mixing drinks. Go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead.
I was going to say you moved on from mixing drinks to just drinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Much simpler. You get a nice bland white wine, put it on ice, and then it just tastes like you're drinking water, and you get really drunk. I should also mention that my favorite anime is Boogie Pop Phantom, a horror anime that I recommend everyone watch. But outside of that, I don't watch anime anymore. But I've seen enough of it to last 5 lifetimes.
I've seen enough.
Oh boy, have I. I've seen the dark. I've seen the gritty. I've seen the poorly animated, I've seen the poorly written, and I consumed it all because I was an addict of anime, and luckily I've broken that habit. So I think that sums up the three of us, the Fear Fiction podcast. I guess we should go over what we'll be doing.
Most likely. I mean, does anybody here know what we're planning to do? Because I don't know.
You know Freddy Freaker?
Yeah.
Fear Ficker. That's what we're going to do.
I see. So, when you make the theme song, which you totally haven't yet, haven't made the jingle yet. No, not at all.
This is not the 4th episode we're recording.
No, this is not the 4th episode. But when you make the theme music, it's going to go dun 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 dun. Okay. It's the Fear Fic.
But it's going to be the only version where he's just yelling into the mic.
I see.
So very, very distorted.
I gotcha.
The premise of the show is we are going to be tackling short, online horror stories and then reading them paragraph by paragraph and analyzing them and joking about them for the purpose of entertainment and artistic fulfillment. That way, if you are a writer out there, you can listen to us, get advice from the community in the comments. What we are doing, even if we're making fun of a story, it is to be constructive, and we're not making fun of the author because we're probably not going to tackle authors if we have a personal beef with them.
And plus, we don't really know anything about the author when we read the story. It's just, we're presented with what we're presented with.
That's kind of the old days of creepypasta, though, when it was completely anonymous. Mm-hmm. Now there's authors, but we try to look at the authors last before reading the story, if possible.
Yeah, and we may glean things about authors from the stories we read, but we're never making concrete statements about them and their intentions. It's just what we think.
And sometimes it can color your perception. If you look up who somebody is beforehand and you make sure, that you get everything, right about them and different things like that, sometimes you might see something where it says, this writer is the most well-known and accomplished creepypasta author with 7 movie deals, and then you read the story, and the entire time it's just colored by, why is this the most popular? Why does this have movie deals? And, that's that totally colors your perception, whereas otherwise you might have been like, well, this is passable, this is okay, this is good, So it's good to not know sometimes.
That's the thing, is we're going to be also pulling from all different kinds of sources. So we're going to be reading stories from the Storage Fleming Unit project, a project that I helmed and will continue to helm and hopefully build again from the ground up. The Creepypasta Wiki, creepypasta.com.
With ad
don't
filters.
Go there without. Yeah, make sure you have ad block on. Creepypasta.org, No Sleep, Let's Not Meet, a bunch of spin-off pasta sites, the SCP Foundation. We've already read a fan fiction from Archive of Our Own. Just trying to get stories from any old where that we can find them if they relate to horror in some way.
It's sort of like, you could think about it as like internet horror without limits. Wherever it is, we'll go and find it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we will exterminate it like ghost hunters.
Oh, God.
No, we don't go into these stories assuming that they are bad.
Right.
And if we assume that they're bad, we are hoping to be surprised.
Yep.
We are not bad creepypasta. Anyway,
we may have written bad creepypastas, but we
may have written it. I think we should probably run down the terms real quick.
All right.
Sure.
So what is creepypasta, if you don't know? It is a very vague catch-all term to describe horror originating from internet message boards. But that is not very helpful for discussion because that means creepypasta can describe art and stories that have completely opposite tone and style and theme. So if you use like classic horror as an example, you have Friday the 13th and The Shining. Both are, horror films starring axe murderers, but the comparison's really kind of in there.
Mm.
So creepypasta has not been a very helpful term. So let's try and get a little bit more specific. There's micropasta, and this is the origin of creepypasta. They are short stories, roughly 1 to 5 paragraphs, including very few details that were copied and pasted around the internet to shock, unnerve, or just make people question reality. These aren't very popular anymore for a number of reasons. One, it's hard for narrators to scout money off these stories since they're so short. And 2, they were often anonymous. And 3, making people question their sense of reality in 2 to 3 paragraphs, not very easy.
Right.
Surprisingly difficult, if you would imagine.
There's only so many times you can write a micropasta and have it be, but it turned out the person calling for me wasn't really that person.
Yeah. The Who Is phone kind of thing.
Yeah.
Then there is the term that I really like to use for what kind of came after that is ashcan horror. I didn't coin this term; one of my fans did, and it comes from the 1920s loose association of artists called the Ashcan School, which painted real life, but in a dark and gritty way often. It's the natural evolution of micropastas, stories posing as factual blogs or articles or reports that are longer than micropastas and include tons of minute details, and they are often credited. There's often an author, whether it's a real author or a name that is like supposed to be the author, if that makes any sense. These are either the kind of horror stories that people face in real life, or very down-to-earth horror scenarios. So believability is key for these kinds of things. Because of the ability to expand and have dialogue, it is more suited for audio dramas and stuff along those lines.
I agree with all of that.
Indeed.
I think it's interesting how it sort of is like creepypasta started out, like you said, as micropasta type things where people were meant to question reality, were meant to think that it was a real scenario. Mm-hmm. Creepypasta sort of became very unrealistic as it became popular with more and more outlandish premises and so on and so forth, which I, of course, am guilty of too. And now it sort of is like coming back to a point whether you, even if you, looking at Ashcan as the prime example, but even if you look at certain things like Let's Not Meet and different things like that, people are sort of, even if they fail at it sometimes, they're trying to come back to a more realistic place with it, I think,
yes.
Which is kind of an interesting thing. Is, people have sort of, whether it's conscious or subconscious, people have sort of unanimously rejected the outlandish part of it, the more unrealistic part. To a certain extent.
Yes.
I'm just thinking about the true dinosaur story I read, and god damn it.
Yeah, but that's very true, and that's the thing, is it's a lot harder to fail at the more ridiculous aspects. So if you're trying to make a story that is kind of a revenge fantasy, that's easier to do than grounding your story. But a lot of people attempt to do that because for someone like myself, who, is mildly dyslexic and has problems writing, it hides my flaws as an author and exemplifies what I'm good at. Because those kind of mistakes add to the realism, adds to a spoken voice, and makes it more personable. It's just then you have to nail the realism afterwards, you know what I mean?
Right.
So on that point, that's a perfect segue into what was cohabitating at the same time as Ashcan horror was getting popular and branching out of micropasta is icon pasta.
Oh, yeah.
Idealized power fantasies, usually written and read by preteens and young teens. These are the slasher films of the creepypasta world. Focused on revenge, this genre doesn't display any of the hallmarks of horror like fear, tension, suspense, or unsettling the reader. I know that I'm being very derogatory. It's just that's what typically you get out of this genre.
Well, it's true.
Yes.
I would struggle to find someone who would disagree with any of those assertions.
I mean, you can basically say, what...
Well, the preteens and young teens writing them would disagree.
I think if you actually, not just in the comments, but if you sat them down and talked to them and said, what about this is scary and not just dark or emotional, I really think that they'd probably be like, yeah, I guess so, but I wanted to write it and I had fun.
Some of them, yeah. Not some. This is what people usually think of when they hear the term creepypasta. They think of Jeff the Killer, and they think of Clockwork and Laughing Jack and Eyeless Jack and Jack in the Box and
Jack Skeleton.
Jack Skeleton, Jack in the Beanbox.
Jack in the Bento Box.
Jack Black. Do we have any more Jacks?
Jack from
Jack White
from The Incredibles.
Jack Sprat. Jack Gray.
Is that
Jack
a real thing?
Sparrow.
No.
Oh, okay.
Um, so obviously, we don't care for this genre, but that doesn't mean that you can't have a story that is in that genre that is effective and is cathartic. So I think whenever we come across a story like that, we're just going to judge it as it is and see if we can get ourselves into that revenge fantasy mindset, if we can feel what the author is feeling, if it does give us that catharsis.
We sh- okay.
It's also worth mentioning that violence, death, and severe, serious subject matters aren't treated with gravity in this genre very often.
Yeah, I was going to say before that icon pastas are usually polka dotted with the statements like, she cut out his eyes, period. And you're like,
Yes.
okay, well, that's a gruesome thing to have happen to you, but it doesn't affect me just as a statement. It's like, okay, her eyes are out now.
We shouldn't go too into depth on the story itself, but a story that did that surprisingly well is Cupcakes. Like, it really got into the gore and made you uncomfortable.
Right. Which it has probably it probably has the record of being one of the most disliked creepypastas, and I think a lot of that is because of how it made people just go, ew.
Yeah, you can't overlook the merits of that story.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is actually something Slimebeast said not too long ago. I think it was about It, the Stephen King story.
Probably.
Of the movies and the newest movie, and a lot of reviewers were saying, "Oh, thank God they left out that child sex scene. That's just bad." And you said,
Right.
"Well, isn't the point of horror to horrify you and make you uncomfortable?"
Well, yeah, I
And-
mean, it's that thing where, if you look at films to a certain extent, you think of what are the most traumatic events in non-horror films, and you think, okay, well, I can think of one, Deliverance.
Oh God, yeah.
And, to remake that, and granted it's a different age group, but, to remake that and say, well, thank God they left out that really disturbing and unsettling scene, and it's like, well, without that, what are you left with in terms of, things to make you uncomfortable? It's sometimes you have to embrace things that are just icky.
I can imagine them remaking it without that part, and then critics saying, "I was not delivered by this movie."
Oh, damn.
Oh God.
So rounding this out with a few more terms, there's ritual pasta. Pretty self-explanatory. You go through a ritual and something happens. There's some sort of risk reward if you go through this urban legend ritual. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Not always urban legends. A lot of them are like strangely arcane and fantastical. But I would say, most of them, and certainly the ones of note, are kind of like very urban legendish.
Yeah, and we don't want to know what happens when they all come together. Lost episodes and haunted cartridges. I think we can mention those in the same breath.
Yes.
Those stories tend to bank off of nostalgia in some form or fashion to varying degrees of success, where you say, I found X piece of lost media, and it paints that media in a different light, or is disturbing and graphic in some way. I'm sure that we'll tackle plenty of those in our time.
Oh, yeah.
And one last term, it's not a genre, it's just an important term. Gerosymptoms, or gerosyndrome, is what you have if you're exhibiting gerosymptoms in your story.
Right.
Which is when a person should not continue reading because they have every reason, or exploring whatever it is they're exploring, but continue to do so out of a unrealistic, morbid curiosity. An example would be, man, I found this My Little Pony DVD, and it had an episode of My Little Pony I hadn't seen where there's a bunch of killing and sex, and I was disturbed and really grossed out. And I kept watching just, to make sure that I would continue to be grossed out and disturbed.
So
I had to find out how depraved it would get.
It's funny. I'm thinking just about Lovecraft right now of how almost all of his stories are based around I found out this horrible, horrible thing and I kept going. And the reason that Lovecraft is not full of Jarrah symptoms is because the person seeking it out like knew what they were doing when they were going in, and they're trying to achieve like some power or knowledge, or it's like there's some benefit. It never turns out well. But Jarrah symptoms are just I found a thing and it was bad. Well, let's keep going, and it's very hollow.
It's interesting how people, and I know we're kind of diverging a bit, but it's interesting how people always feel the need to explain why they keep going. Because it's like, if I tuned on an infomercial at night and Billy Mays was on and he just started cutting himself and staring into the camera, I wouldn't immediately think this is a cursed thing that will end my life, but I must see more. I'd be watching it and going, so is this a comedy skit? What exactly is going on here? Is there some point to this? Is it, is this an Adult Swim thing? I don't understand.
Yeah, I was about to say. Then you realize, I'm watching Cartoon Network.
Yeah,
right.
But a lot of the stories are like, this was horrible, this was demented, I threw up all over, and yet I continued to watch. It's like, in real life you probably would just be like, this is weird. See how it ends.
Should we add to the list of terms that vomiting is ubiquitous and almost always poorly used in creepypasta?
Man, there's been a rash of that. I've seen that cropping up much more recently, like vomiting at things that wouldn't make you vomit. Like he punched him really hard in the face on the cartoon, and it made me vomit.
He punched him in the stomach, and for some reason I vomited instead of him. But
I saw a porno, and the woman's nipples got erect, and I vomited. I'm like, what?
That should be a comment. Everybody go and comment that on a Pornhub video. But, yeah, and I don't know,
You're going to go to, like, some amateur video and comment, man, that made me throw up, and then you're going to make that person have real body shame, so don't do that.
Aww. Well, you could say, your taste in drapes in the background.
Yeah, I always love comments on porn sites, like, unrelated to the actual subject matter. It's like, this lady's wristwatch isn't working. What's going on there?
Are we expected to believe? But yeah. I mean, did we want to cover like keyhole fiction, or am I jumping the gun?
Oh my God! Sorry.
How dare you?
I had stuff written down.
How dare you?
You gave me a segue to icon pasta, so I skipped over keyhole fiction.
How dare you? You skipped over keyhole fiction for fucking icon pasta.
Oh man.
Oh.
Is called such.
That's a low blow.
Is called such as it's like peering into another universe through a small hole. It isn't a wholly new idea. Pause for laughter, no laughter. It isn't a wholly new idea, as it's similar to this to speculative fiction. Subject includes inventions like social media, smartphones, or even things like personal drones or crowdfunding, new bits of the world and what they could possibly look like in an alternate dimension or in the future. These pose challenges, but if you can adapt to that style of writing, it might just be worth the effort.
Yeah,
see, I wrote up a lovely little thing.
There you go. Yeah, it's basically like, what did I call it before? Minimalist world building.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're building your own world. You're building your own separate world, separate reality, but you're doing it in a minimalist way. You're not explaining all the background of everything and how everything came to be and what everything is. Somebody can just go over to the kitchen counter and pick up the spatulator. And you're like, well, that sounds like spatula, so maybe it's, similar to that. The audience just has to realize for themselves what things might or might not mean,
This is a little bit off topic, but when I do my sci-fi podcast, I take a lot from the short sci-fi stories Reddit or subreddit, and a lot of what I read on there is very minimalist world building, very, very keyholes. So I'm a big fan of keyhole fiction, and I do encourage people to try their hand at that.
All right, so I think we've covered everything in depth now.
Think so.
That we, got keyhole fiction in there, the most important, arguably.
Of course.
We should also mention that probably the most popular place for horror on the internet nowadays is No Sleep. For better or for worse.
If you
Kind of both.
if you don't believe me, or you don't believe Brandon here, go to the Creepypasta Wikia as of today's date, which we'll be dating this episode, but it's late June. And the pasta of the month is a famous no sleep story. So there you go.
Somehow,
And,
pasta of the month is one from several months prior, maybe years actually, posted on a different site. But yeah,
Yeah, No Sleep has a policy of you're not allowed to criticize stories saying that they aren't in real life. You are supposed to follow the No Sleep rule of assuming that everything is real, acting as though everything is real. The problem is that this has the opposite effect of what you might logically conclude. You might think that that means that it'll make everything more realistic, when in fact it does the opposite, because no one gets called on their bullshit. And if you want your story to be realistic, you want everyone to call you on your bullshit. That way it's sharpening your steel. It's making you write a more realistic story, kind of in the way that going on stage in front of a bunch of people and doing a stand-up routine is going to make you funnier, because you have to be through the social anxiety, fearing that everyone's going to make fun of you if you're not funny.
yeah, definitely. I mean, that's arguably the biggest issue with No Sleep, just in total. And I don't know what other issue there would be other than the clickbait titles. Is that just that idea?
Really quick, I should also mention that they implemented that no sleep rule, and now I wish they hadn't.
Oh, God damn it!
Yeah, clickbait titles is a big issue.
Yeah,
Their titles are always. I'm sorry if you're like one of our fans and already know this, but that's what they do. Is they always write titles that are, I worked as a plumber at a rich house, and now I wish I hadn't. I got bottle service at an urban bar, and now I wish I hadn't. Just anything.
Urban bar.
Urban bar. You can't say black bar, because then that's racist. You got to say urban.
Jesus Christ.
Or it has an L-shaped bar.
Perceived value of this bar.
Damn it! Not that shit again. I don't know what any of that means. You're not allowed to say that.
That is not going anywhere. One of our the authors that we've that's in the community, Lalaliat, wrote a fake no sleep story, and it got to #1 for that day.
Right.
And it had a purposefully clickbait title. That's just a good measure of
And
how
allegedly you're not
clickbaity
allowed
this shit
to-
is.
Yeah, allegedly you're not allowed to have a clickbait title.
Well, you're not allowed to put, and now I wish I hadn't, because they recognize that as automatic clickbait, but it has done nothing to stem the tide of clickbait titles. I just tweeted out one today. Oh God, let me find it again. It was like, I found a journal. Oh, there it is. I found a journal in the house I just bought. It is terrifying. Update number 3 of a series.
And let's face it. This is basically, we call it clickbait, and that may be like a bit of a stretch, but it is basically saying, one weird journal this urban explorer found. You won't believe number 13 on the list of pages in it. It pretty much matches beat for beat the same type of titling. So it may be a bit of an exaggeration to say clickbait titles, but at the end of the day, it really does line up pretty well.
A small bit of an exaggeration still. But the issue there is that it's explaining what the story is in the title rather than letting the shocking aspect of the story,
right,
the twist, the arc of the story come naturally. It's a result of search engine optimization being as important as it is in this day and age. And that really does not jive well with the whole mission statement of trying to make a realistic ashcan story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Somebody should go back and give clickbait titles to all the great classics of horror in history. Like, a raven flew in my window saying my dead wife's name. Okay, well, we don't need to read the poem now. We got it. But,
there's I work at an Arctic research station, and there's this weird eldritch abomination. I burned it down, so it's K.
But yeah, I met with a
I'm
child who
disappointed.
saw dead people, and
Yes. And then it turned out I was the dead people.
yeah, exactly. Anyway,
My dad decided to look after a hotel for the winter. Now I wish he hadn't.
Jesus Christ.
There's I didn't know this until recently, until my coworker pointed it out. There is a sequel to The Shining, as written by Stephen King, and it's also getting a movie. And oh boy, I would hate to be that director because you are living in a pretty big shadow. Like, damn.
Well, I mean, you just cast Kristen Wiig, you're fine.
No, you're not. No one's going to compare this film to The Shining. Everyone will be sensible enough to realize that it's the sequel that no one cares about.
That no one asked for.
Well, I mean, there's a sequel to It, so I mean, how long before we get that?
Well, there's going to be someone who's going to like make the sequel to Kill a Mockingbird. It's like you're going to do the film adaptation of Go Set a Watchman, and that's going to happen at some point.
Mm.
And no one's going to like care about that because it's the sequel.
And I like how, is it Zemeckis that says there's not going to be any new Back to the Future movie? I believe.
I hope so.
And I hate to be that guy, but I'm going to be that guy and just be like, but what about after you die? You have to write it down somewhere, and you have to figure out a way to hold people to it, because otherwise, we're going to have it at some point.
Who owns that IP? Is it him? Because if it's not, I mean, yeah.
Well, I mean, I haven't looked into it too much, but if he's saying, because he said declaratively there will not be another one, so I would assume he has at least some controlling stake where he can prevent it,
Yeah, well, like you said, maybe until he dies, and
Yeah.
wherever those shares go.
Jane Lynch as Doc Brown, Jennifer Lawrence as Marty.
This has been the Fear Fiction Podcast. Your hosts are Abysme, Dead Palette, and Slimebeast. Music by Abysme. Art by C.F. Comer. Voiceover by Atticus Jackson. Edited by Elias the Intern. Subscribe to Fearfic on YouTube to stay up to date on new episodes.
In theaters this summer, Stan Kinderschplatzen is a man with a mission. But this is no ordinary mission. In a world full of superheroes and adult situations, one chooses to be different. He takes on the crimes no one is willing to fight. He battles the criminals who slip through the cracks. He fights children. Children who commit crimes. He shoots them dead right in their little faces. Stan Kinderschplatzen is the Child Killer. From Marvel Studios, the people who brought you a few good movies and a bunch of shitty sequels, strap yourself in for a non-stop kill ride with no height requirement. The Child Killer. Pre-purchase your ticket today and get a free fucking thing. Writing on the sidewalk in chalk. That's technically graffiti.